If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Former paranormal skeptics, what changed your mind? As a kid, my best friend's younger brother claimed he had an imaginary best friend and he would often be playing and talking to this friend. We would make fun of him in light but still thought it was odd. My father, in a couple of occasions when visiting this friend in their home, he claimed he would see a shadow run from room to room. Long story short, a family member ended up buying the home and is currently living there. Last year for Christmas we gathered there and ended up talking about the odd occurrences that were going on in this house. I told my story of how my best friend's little brother and his alleged friend. To my surprise, the current homeowners said that they too have seen a kid and that on 2 occasions they've had their neighbors ask why they leave their child alone. They have no kids. I was a freshman in high school and my mom and I had just moved into a house. On days that I would be at home all day during the weekends, summer, or just when I was out sick, every single day at about 1 o'clock, always the exact same time, there would be loud footsteps if someone was running across the roof over my room. It was only over my room that they could be heard, and it was distinctly a human running across the roof in 2 feet. The footsteps would start from the corner of my room facing the rest of the house and end at the edge of the roof in front of the front yard. I told my mom about this after a few months and she told me that the people who owned the house we were renting told her that the previous owner was a postal worker who jumped off the roof and killed himself. Another time in that same house I heard clear as day the sound of a man clearing his throat coming from another room. This was after midnight and it was only my mom and I. One night my sister woke me up. I was asleep on the couch, freaking out. She was standing by the patio door, smoking. Between us was the dining room and living room and I was next to the front door. Above those 2 rooms, on the roof, we could hear very distinct, very heavy boot footsteps. She's like, someone's on the roof. I opened the front door and the steps continued walking back and forth from my door to hers. We yelled out that we were calling the cops, but the steps continued without pausing. Our grandmother was in the back bedroom and this woman is not afraid of anything. She grabs a flashlight and takes off out the front door with my sister behind her to see who's messing around up there. I'm still standing there listening to the steps while they shine the light up on the roof. No one there. They walk around to the back side to check the other side of the A-frame roof. Not a soul. They come back in and the boots are still stomping up there, back and forth, over and over. My grandmother chalks it up to raccoons in the crawl space and goes back to bed, but we point out that the crawl space doesn't go back that far and raccoons don't wear boots. After about 5 more minutes, the pacing stomps stop and it never starts up again as long as we live there. Now here's the super creepy part. A relative of ours had ended his life directly behind this house some years before and he had been the person who put the roof on the house. He always wore work boots. And the time my sister woke me up was around the time they believe he may have committed the deed. It would always get really cold in the house around that time as well, even in the summer, so it wouldn't surprise me if that were true. When I was 19, I worked in Europe for a bit. This was in the 80s, before cell phones. Went on a holiday to a remote chalet in Switzerland that a school friend had invited me to visit, and while waiting for my bus, evening, so a bit dark out, a very strange man started harassing me. He spoke French, which I didn't speak, but I got the gist. He was menacing and dangerous. A young woman my age walked up to him and scolded him in French and he left. She looked at me, and in perfect American English, said, "Let's find your bus." She led me to a bus and I told her where I was going and she said, "Yeah, I assume so." She got on the bus with me, helped me with my belongings and sat with me until my stop. We spoke a bit and I asked her name, and it was the same as my name, which was really odd. She said she had lived in the community just beyond my destination since she was born. On the way, the wind blew heavily and a large branch crashed in front of us, but the bus was able to move around it. The woman never seemed worried at all. She finally said, "Your stop is the next one. Be ready to get off." She told me how to get to the place I was going, and told me who to ask for at the door. I followed her instructions, and ended up in a delightful chalet by the Diableries. The next morning the owner of the chalet came to breakfast with his daughter, who I knew from school. They said how surprising it was for me to find the location at night, and I mentioned the young woman who helped me. They had funny looks on their faces. They had lived there for many years, and never heard of her. They asked again what her name was, and I felt silly telling them it was the same as my name, and they seemed to kind of pity me at that point. Whoever she was, she did me a solid. Still a bit of a skeptic, though given some of my experiences I perhaps shouldn't be. I have lived in 2 odd houses and almost a third. The first was my grandmother's house. It was one of the first houses in the area, but apparently it was normal until a neighbor started ducking around. I was living there with some mates, cheap rent. All of us had the normal kind of stuff. Small lights and shadows moving down the hall and phantom knocks. The constant feeling someone was watching you. The feeling was bad enough that no one wanted to be alone in that place. Though to be honest, I always thought it liked me. This was all well and good until we watched the third Exorcist movie. The movie, well, changed. The post priest turned and talked to us. For over 20 years I believed I had some kind of psychotic break. However, about a year ago my best mate was telling my daughter about that accursed place. Lights, shadows, etc. Then he talked about the time the telly talked to us. Thing was, we never talked about it. Both of us were afraid we were losing our shit. The second was the first place I lived in with my future wife and mother of my children. Normal house with an abandoned car out the front. No heebie-jeebies during the inspection, not setting off my weird shit-o-meter, though the garage was cold. It got progressively weirder. My girlfriend saw a shadow in the mirror whilst she was showering. My friend who lived with us started hearing crying late at night. Oh, and our dog refused to enter the garage. She would follow my girlfriend everywhere except there. The weirdness peaked when the CD player played by itself. The worst part was the song Like Suicide by Soundgarden. Over and over again. Inspected the CD and no scratches. We eventually spoke to the neighbors and found out what happened. A young bloke had gassed himself in a car. What car? Well, the one parked in front of the house, of course. We got the cops to remove the car and the problems dissipated. I've got two. I did a Ouija board by myself once, and will swear on my life that shit was moving on its own to answer my questions. Guy's name was Timmy. Another one was, I live near a big park full of soccer fields, and a buddy of mine and I were just riding our longboards around the track that surrounds them. It was around midnight, it was super foggy, like couldn't see 10 feet in front of us. We stopped cause we heard a whistle, and we stood there silently and hear a full-blown soccer game going on. Crowd cheering, a whistle every now and then. Some booze. There was a flat-out ghost soccer game going on in that fog. We ran into the field towards what we heard. The sound eventually stopped, and picked back up again as we moved away from it. I actually have plenty, now that I think about it. My best friend died a couple years ago, and a week after his funeral I was driving on a pretty quiet highway in a snowstorm. An Erykah Badu song came on that I used to sing for him all the time, and I broke down crying while I was driving. I sang that song for him the day we met and he asked me to never stop. I had never experienced grief like this before. I literally wanted to die sometimes. Anything to make it stop hurting. I thought that I would never be able to feel companionship again, that I would be alone for the rest of my life without him. So I'm driving down the highway, in the snow, feeling these feelings and crying. All of a sudden it felt like somebody from my passenger seat slapped me in my face really hard, and then the car in front of me slammed on its brakes. I would have hit him at 70 miles per hour if I wasn't jolted out of the zone I was in. I pulled over and just sort of froze. One thing to note about my friend is that he had the absolute best hugs. Almost everyone mentioned it during the memorial and still talk about it today. Truly. The best hugs. He was a big guy, so it literally felt like a giant teddy bear wrapping its arms around you with all of the love he has to give. I will never enjoy a hug again, BC. I will never be hugged like he did. While I was sitting there crying, it's difficult to describe. I felt this warmth all over, inside and out. It felt like I was being hugged by him. And in my head, I heard his voice telling me that I was being melodramatic and that I can't give up. Reminding me that I'm capable of handling this. Slapping me to save my life and calling me stupid for wallowing is absolutely something he would do. I heard his voice in my head, but it was louder than a thought. It's hard to explain, but it was like I could really hear him, just inside my mind. Instantly I felt like I was going to be okay. I felt happy even, like this overwhelming sense of almost closure. I knew that I was going to be okay, and I knew that he was not in pain anymore, and that meant that he was okay, too. We both struggled with our mental health and found solace in each other. I like to imagine that he mustered up as much strength as he could to make sure that I was going to be okay. And he did. Of course, grief is still hard, but after that experience it's been something that I'm okay living with, most of the time. He would have wanted me to know that he's alright now. He would have known that it was going to eat me alive. And he made sure to let me know so that I could be okay. So a few years ago I had a crackhead neighbor. They found him dead in his trailer. He had been there for about 2 weeks. When they found him he also had a dog, so you can guess what happened there. I decided to go for a walk in the woods since I didn't have to worry about him thinking I was trespassing on his road, which was actually a public road leading to my cousin's property. I brought a knife with me in case of dogs or bears or some other animal that felt threatened. I was coming up on a small pond, which was where I was headed for. I was just a few hundred feet from the pond when up on a hill to my right I heard rustling. I looked up and saw this black mass running in the opposite direction of me. I barely got a glimpse at it and I could only see the back half of it. All I saw was what looked like a small bear running on its hind legs, but the legs looked like dog legs. I left immediately, but still going the same direction I was already heading because I knew that the path went in a giant circle, but I ended up having to turn around and go back the way I came because I came across a dog. It wasn't barking, just staring me down. I have went back in those woods and I will never stop going. As a kid I had several experiences that made me believe, but I was also the youngest in my family and the prime target for pranks. So it's hard for me to tell what I imagined, and what was real. Most of it probably imagined. Until this one time. We moved to the suburbs when I was in the 2nd grade and that house always gave my brother and I the heebie-jeebies. Your normal paranormal activity stuff that can either be explained or that people just don't believe. All of the cupboards being open, mom calling you into the room when she isn't home, footsteps. Those kinds of things. It wasn't until I watched my dog get smacked out of the air mid-jump that I was convinced. He was a Great Dane, so a very large dog. We were in the backyard playing and he's doing his kangaroo thing. Danes do this thing when they are excited where they just jump a lot. Much like zoomies, but bouncy. He was bouncing at something, like he was playing with someone, and then mid-jump, his body flew to the side and he yelped and ran inside with his tail between his legs. The other 2 dogs followed, tails tucked, and my friend and I were just left standing there like WTF just happened. He had a heart attack in that same spot 1 year later and died. I was solo hiking the Appalachian Trail, got the feeling I was being watched right around sundown. Turned around and looked down the slope of the trail, made eye contact with the biggest owl I've ever seen, sitting on a branch about 30 feet up. Only it didn't look exactly like an owl. It was owl-shaped, it had the reflective eyes, but it looked like a human, crouching. My human brain instantly shut off, and the only thought I could form was fire. So I built a damn big fire, and stayed up the entire night while sharpening spears. Crazy how fast our brain devolves back to a caveman's when we're threatened with the unknown. Also, the first time I told that story to someone, they told me about skinwalkers, and man, I don't believe in a ton of cryptid/paranormal stuff, but that night made me a believer in skinwalkers, at least. I grew up in Corona, California, where we had a supposed haunted piece of property where a house that once stood was burned down. The property was tucked in the hills of Corona, so you had to go to the end of a cul-de-sac, then take a mile-long dirt road to this particular property. My friends and I would go at night all the time. At night I had a couple of experiences, but due to my skepticism, I would explain them away in one way or another. I would typically chop it up to other kids they're screwing with us. That's until my friend Johnny and I decided to explore the property during the day. First, when we pull up and park in the cul-de-sac, we noticed a father and his 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, unloading their bikes from their truck. Once they unloaded, they headed down that dirt road on their bikes for a nice family bike ride on the dirt trails. We followed shortly after, going down the same road towards the haunted property. My friend and I stayed taking pictures and screwing around at the burned down foundation, while the family kept riding ahead. My friend and I stayed at the house for at least 2 hours before we decided to walk back down that dirt road back to our car. On the way down that dirt road we both heard, very very clearly in a young girl's voice, "Daddy, wait. Daddy, where are you going? Wait for me." We thought absolutely nothing of it, assuming the dad and son may have been pedaling too fast for the daughter to keep up. We only heard it that once, so we continued walking down the dirt road to our car. Once we got to the end of the dirt road and back to the cul-de-sac, we both froze and turned pale white. The truck that the family came in was gone. They left well before we even came back. That dirt road is the only way in and out of the property. There is 0 ways around it. Not only that, but there are no other buildings or people on that property. It was completely abandoned. And when people do come screw around there, they all have to park on the cul-de-sac. I tried a million ways to convince myself that there was a logical answer, but almost 20 years later, I still haven't come up with anything. The craziest part of this story is that my experience made me really want to read up on that property and what makes it haunted. Well, it turns out the house that once stood there belonged to a wealthy Corona family in the late 1800s. Apparently the parents went out of town and left the kids with a nanny for a couple of days. The nanny was a drunk who locked the kids in the basement often. One night she passed out drunk, knocking over a kerosene lantern on her way down. That lantern burned the house down with the children trapped in the basement. It's to my understanding only the children died as they were unable to escape the basement. Well, my house is extremely haunted. It was actually on the Travel Channel. Anyways, the other night I was in my room just playing PlayStation and the TV was on downstairs in the living room, pretty low volume, when all of a sudden I heard my own voice. I thought it was coming from my phone, like I accidentally had a video playing, but when I looked at my phone the screen was black, so I walk into the hallway and then I really heard it. I immediately got the feeling of impending doom in my stomach, which made it turn into a knot. "Mom! Come downstairs, help me," in my voice. I immediately freaked out and pulled my phone out to record it. I ran outside with all my dogs for 2 hours till my parents came back home. I'd quote it was, but my house was built on an Indian burial ground, so, Skinwalker maybe? I do experience extreme paranormal scenarios. At least once every 2 weeks. The same thing happened to me another time. It was a Saturday night, like 3 a.m. I had just got off of playing video games. I was getting ready to walk downstairs to grab a glass of milk when all of a sudden I heard my mom say, "Matt, come downstairs." I replied and said, "Yeah, I'm coming down now," when all of a sudden it dawned on me that it was 3 a.m. and why is my mom awake right now? So instead of going downstairs, I walked down the hallway and peeked into my parents' room, and my mother was in bed sound asleep. So at first I really thought that maybe I was just hearing things, so I slowly closed my parents' door and walked back to the top of the stairs, and I took the first step down when again I hear "Matt, come down" in my mom's voice. I never moved so quick in my life. I sprung back up the steps and ran backwards into my room. When I told my mom the story the next morning, she told me, "Yeah, well, guess what? Me and your sister have heard your voice a few times before too." My parents were friends with an older couple who owned a few rental properties near the university that I was attending. One of these properties was about 20 minutes outside of the university in a semi-rural area. It was on several acres of land by itself, so no neighbors visible through the trees. It had been badly treated by the previous family that lived there and was basically unrentable. So they allowed me to stay there rent-free while I fixed the place up. So I spent the first few months there alone in the woods, in between studies, scrubbing, painting, repairing and replacing stuff on the property. One night, after I had the place looking pretty good, I had a girlfriend over. We were watching a movie in my bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway. The other end of the hallway was the kitchen, and I always left the light over the sink on. In addition, the front porch light was on too, and both sources of light could be seen in from the room. So we're on my bed doing some serious making out in various stages of undress, when suddenly the lights coming into the room go dark, and instantly, and I mean instantly, the room temperature dropped about 20 degrees. It was a warm summer night in the 70s, and it dropped into what felt like the 50s. Both of us sat straight up and tried to look down the hallway, but it was pure darkness. Not just pure darkness, but the kind that absorbs and swallows light. There was this heavy, dark presence in the room that had us paralyzed with fear. We could feel hatred and anger emanating from the doorway. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this and thinking about it. Then, after about 30 seconds, it vanished. The warmth and light rushed back into the room and it was gone. We both grabbed our stuff, jumped in her car and went back to her place. I didn't go back to that house for 3 days, and nothing else ever happened there again. My family was deeply evangelical. We didn't believe in angels or demons coming to us, or that dead relatives could be contacted, anything like that. They legit called it Catholic propaganda. When I was 16, my parents were going through a pretty bad divorce and my mom moved out to an apartment where both of us were living. I had some friends over one night and we were bored and decided to tell ghost stories. At some point, all of my lights went off and the door to the balcony opened. It was a sliding door, so it couldn't be the wind. I also lived on the 4th floor, so it couldn't be an intruder. I brushed it off as strong winds and went to sleep. My friends were scared shitless. Fast forward a few weeks, I came home from my then BF's house late at night and went to take a shower. When I was ready to sleep, I opened my mom's bedroom. It was the only one with air conditioning, so we shared it, and there was this 6-foot-tall woman in a nightgown standing right by the door, hunched over. She had long black hair like my mom and I couldn't really see her face, but I thought it was just my mom getting up for a late night snack. I called Mom, "Sorry for coming late, didn't mean to wake you up," no response, and she walked past me, without looking. I turned my back to see if I was hallucinating and sure enough, she was gone. That night, I had a horrible sleep paralysis episode, and to this day, I see that woman haunting me in my peripheral vision when I'm walking home at night. I don't know who she is or what she wants. She has never hurt me or anyone else, but she made me believe ghosts are real. Spirit didn't let us out of my room. So I was about 16 years old and to that time very interested in ghosts, paranormal things, etc. My mom is, I wouldn't say medium, but highly esoteric and can see things in or around other humans. For example, she can feel bad energies and also describe dead loved ones of her customers standing beside perfectly. If you want to hear more stories of my mom, just let me know. So her being so sensitive for those things did wake my interest even more. So I went online and researched on ways to communicate with energies or spirits and found out a way to do so. I invited my sister and 2 of our neighbor kids to help and watch. I didn't want to do that alone, because of obvious reasons. We waited for my mother to leave because she prohibited specifically to ever communicate with the other world. We wrote letters and numbers and also yes and no on a paper, cropped them out and arranged them in a circle. We basically crafted a Ouija board. We lowered the shutters in my room. Yes, we did that in my room, stupid I know, and lit candles and placed them in different places in my room. Me and my sister placed our hands on an upside down drinking glass and the neighbor kids watched from the bed. The first few times they laughed and chuckled when we said phrases like "Is someone here who wants to talk with us?" or "If you want to communicate, please do that." After a few minutes, a few candles started to flicker. I didn't think much about it because candles flicker usually. But after some more time some of them really started to freak me out. They started to look like someone tried to blow them out. You know, like when you want to blow out candles but don't use enough air, so you just blow the flame in one direction and the glass started moving. I looked at my sister and she looked at me, simultaneously asking if the other one is pushing it. We both got really freaked out, so we took our hands of the glass and that freaking thing moved on its own. I got a panic attack and we all screamed and ran to my door to get out. We closed it before. In hindsight it was a very stupid idea. I pressed the handle of my door down but that thing didn't move a bit. My sister and the neighbor kids started to help pressing it down. We leaned on it with all our body weight combined but it didn't move an inch. The candles started to go out and we just screamed and screamed. Eventually it opened and we ran into the kitchen in a corner and just cried. From this day on I didn't sleep well in my room because I felt watched all the time and my writing desk chair started moving on its own. I placed it under the desk and the next morning it stood a good meter away from it. My mom also noticed that my room didn't feel right, like something lurks inside of it, and asked me if I did something stupid. Eventually I told her and she was furious, saying that I could have brought much more evil in our apartment than a spirit that amuses itself by disturbing us. She did a ritual in my room saying a few phrases, putting in protective circuit at it and smoking it out with sage, and I was never disturbed by it again. Nonetheless, to say that I'll never do that again. Just a normal day, me and my brother were playing cricket in the field. We lost the ball. In search of it we went. Near the woods. During our search we found a skeleton of a goat with no matter remaining except the bones. Skull was not there and a strong smell. We thought it might just have been a fox which hunted the goat. During evening me and my brother saw a figure which was almost 7 feet, had a strong smell and rammed a tree which fell. Creepy part is the next day nearly 500 people, in our town, reported a creature with the head of a goat and body of a hairy man. The number of people who reported increased over the week. For the next month the people of the town burnt fireworks at night to keep the creature away. Windows were closed as soon as evening struck. It was a nightmare for the town. After nearly 2 months everything stopped suddenly. Okay. So this is my experience, though I don't know if it qualifies. 100% swear it is true. For context, I am 32 and I became aware something was paranormal about my house very early on. Activity continued until I finally left home. I grew up in a very old house which had weird phenomenon happen all the time. Nobody wanted to visit my house. My friends were shit scared of staying over and would most often leave before it got late. One friend stayed over a couple of times but would refuse to go upstairs. The top floor was the worst for weird shit, alone. Nothing major like apparitions or voices or stuff moving ever happened, but there was always this heavy, oppressive atmosphere. It made walking down the hall at night feel so utterly insurmountable that it was as hard as climbing Everest. Sometimes I hid in my room all night even though I desperately needed the bathroom because the hallway felt so forbidding, like it was waiting to capture me or something. Sometimes you would reach out for the door handle of the bedroom, or even look at the door and you'd feel something wrong on the other side. No matter what it was you wanted, a drink, the toilet, etc., you'd give up any hope of getting it and crawl back into bed and turn your back on the door. It sounds lame, I know, but it was freaking terrifying. Anyway, the actual thing I wanted to talk about is something that used to happen when I was very young, like from about 3 years to 8 years. I told my dad over and over that there was this thing outside my window staring in at me. My bedroom is on the 2nd story. It was just a black mass with no features really except weird triangular eyes. If you locked eyes with him, that was it, you had to keep looking. I know it sounds weird, but I just felt like something awful would happen if I looked away. Like he'd somehow get into the house. He felt really ducking malevolent. I even knew the thing's name. Don't know how, it's not as if he ever told me his name. I just knew it. My dad got really freaked out eventually because by the time I was 8 he thought I would have grown out of it. Except this thing was real and not a fantasy to be grown out of. I eventually changed rooms to the opposite side of the house and the creature never reappeared again. But my old childhood bedroom was one of the rooms in the house that had the worst feeling, oppressive, wrong, etc. My dad tried sleeping in there for a few weeks when we decorated and ended up sleeping downstairs on the sofa. I didn't ask why because we all knew the house was weird, we just didn't talk about it because deep down we were all pretty unnerved by it all. This sounds really comedic, but I swear to God it was the most ducking terrifying thing ever, and I wasn't a kid who got spooked easily. When I was about 8, my best friend and I were leprechaun hunting in my house. We set up the broadcasting end of a baby monitor in the basement and the receiving end in my room on the second floor to try and catch a leprechaun making noise. My best friend was in the basement and I was in my room when we both heard this awful Donald Duck type quacking. I heard it through the baby monitor, she heard it in the basement, and we both ran to meet each other, freaked out and screaming like 8-year-old girls. It terrified us as there was no explanation and no one and nothing in the house that could make that sound. Nothing. As we got older we still couldn't figure it out, but I didn't think it was paranormal or otherworldly or anything like that. I didn't have an explanation, though. I brushed it off and tried to forget about it. Now, years before this, both of my brothers saw red, demonic glowing eyes in our basement. At separate times, years apart. My mom told me about this as a kid, as it shook them both up. I didn't really believe it. It creeped me out, but I tried to explain it away. As a teen I had the opportunity to move into the basement and make it my bedroom. I refused to remember the eyes incidents because I didn't want to freak myself out, and again I tried to explain away the weird quacking incident. I don't know if I didn't believe it or if I didn't want to believe it. Probably the latter, because I wanted that basement room all to myself, so I told myself that all those things had perfectly reasonable explanations. But once I moved into the basement, weird things started happening. Lights flickered a lot, but I chalked it up to just old lights. But then my stereo started turning on and blaring static at 2 a.m. repeatedly. It was terrifying, but I told myself it was just a short or a truck going by messed up the radio signal. Or something. It was too freaky to allow myself to believe it was anything but explainable and reasonable. I ended up moving out of the basement for unrelated things, but I didn't argue with my parents. I was happy they were making me move upstairs. Fast forward 8 years or so. I had moved out, had a kid, and my kid and I moved back into the same house with my parents after his dad left us and I was extremely sick. My son was 4 or 5 and went into the basement to play one day. It had been converted into a toy train and playing room. Suddenly, he ran upstairs, completely freaked out, and said, "Mommy, I heard a weird quacking noise like Donald Duck downstairs." I nearly shat myself. We don't have ducks where I live. We don't have farmland near us. And even if we did, you sure as hell wouldn't be able to hear them from in the basement. I had denied and denied and denied that there was something going on in the basement for 20 years. But when my kid experienced the same weird, very specific thing that I had, I just couldn't deny it anymore. I don't know what it is. I do believe in real evil, demons and such, but I don't know if I necessarily believe in ghosts in the traditional sense. I don't know what it is, but I now believe in more than just what we can see. I do want to add that I believe there is something going on with my entire neighborhood. We only have 12 houses in the neighborhood and almost every single one of our households have had multiple people with serious illnesses. Severe Lyme disease for 3 of my family members and a myriad of illnesses for me. The next door neighbors had lupus and prostate cancer. Another neighbor had cancer that ultimately killed him. Another neighbor, a young guy with really young kids, got terminal cancer. When they moved out, and he died, another family moved in and their teenage son was diagnosed with cancer. And that's just a few of the houses. Household after household in this tiny neighborhood has been wrecked with illness, and it's just too many to be coincidence or even statistics. Theories vary from being built on an old Native American burial ground, to contamination from a plant, to curses, etc. etc. A guy was viciously stabbed and buried in a shallow grave in the woods by our houses, and our whole town has had dozens upon dozens of suicides in the last 20 years. I don't know what to make of it all. Even my very level-headed therapist who lives in this town believes it's cursed or that there is true evil forces at work. I used to be such a skeptic when people talked about this kind of stuff. Hell, I'm still skeptic when I hear other people's stories. But I know there's something going on. I'm not a skeptic anymore, I just don't know what exactly to believe. This is coming from somebody who gets scared easy. Back a few years ago, I went camping. I don't really believe that much in paranormal stuff, but it's still scary to me. It's super late, everybody in the tent is asleep, but I get up to grab some water. My water bottle was empty, so I slip outside to fill it up, and hear something walking around. I kinda laughed to myself and tried to over-exaggerate the situation to make it feel less scary. Wow, what if that was a Skinwalker? I better run. How scary. And stuff like that. I hear the footsteps getting closer, and see a deer. A buck, I think. The deer had antlers. Anyways, I finish filling up my water and decide to stand and watch the deer for a bit. I'm watching the deer, and it looks up at me. We make eye contact. The deer's still kinda far away, not inside the camp, a little outside of our camp, so I start walking back to the tent and assume I just scared it away with the eye contact. I look back, and oddly, the deer's on its back legs. I swear, it's began disturbingly standing as a human. I heard it start to make a weird noise that sounds like a cry. I rushed back into my tent, as most people would do after a deer started standing and acting as a human. To this day, I swear I saw a skinwalker. My sister's old house was haunted. I was skeptical then, but there was definitely something in her house. I think it was a kid. My sister had 2 little girls at the time, and her house was full of toys. I moved in after a breakup and this ghost kid loved to duck with me. I was on my own in her garden, having a smoke, and Therese, this teddy by the toy house. It had been out there for months, in the rain, was damaged and all sorts. It was a small bear with buttons on the stomach, a light-up bear. It had this cheery little song, "I'm a friendly light-up bear, I'll teach you, 1, 2, 3. A sleepy, hungry, happy bear. Hey, come and hug me." I remember when they got it. As I'm sat there, minding my own business, and this bear starts to sing. It sings the whole song, and stops. I shrug it off. The bear was wet, broken, probably just dying off. Then it sings again, the whole song. I laugh it off nervously, and me being an idiot says, "If Therese, anyone here, make the bear sing again." Few minutes of silence, I laugh proudly that I'd tempted this ghostie and it failed. Then the ducking thing starts lighting up, but the song is distorted. "I'm a friendly light up, I'm a friendly light up, I'm a friendly, I'm a friendly, I'm a friendly." Well, I grabbed that mother ducker and hauled it over the wall to die. Went back inside, tried to forget. But the whole 2 years I was there, toys were going off all the time. They had a Disney play kitchen in the bathroom upstairs. This thing was broken, no batteries, but the kids played with it still. Every single time I walked into that house, the kitchen went off. We could hear it upstairs. It would make a boiling kettle noise, and then let out a girly giggle. In the end I just started talking back. "Yes, hello, I've just got in. Let me sit down, would ya?" My sister said that the only time it ever went off was when I came home. I kind of half believed, half shrugged it off. Until one night, me and my sister are going out for a girls' night and my best friend came round. We were having some pre-drinks in the kitchen and I turn around and my friend has gone deathly pale and is staring right ahead. I ask what's wrong, and it takes some persuading, but she eventually looks at me with big eyes and says, "I've just seen a little girl standing at the bottom of the stairs." And she was dead serious. We didn't talk about it much and my sister eventually moved away, but there were so many things. My niece trying to play toys with someone in the corner of the room. A glass tossed across the kitchen. I never got a bad feeling about whatever it was, it just freaked me out a bit. I've got more stories, but those are my most prominent ones. My friend and I saw a translucent pair of white, misty, ghost legs run past the front of my car, to which it disappeared as soon as it hit the curb of the sidewalk. We both looked at each other with me quickly saying, "Describe what you just saw," to which he confirmed what we both saw. We still talk about it every now and then. There were other instances in my life that were questionable but not as undeniable as the aforementioned story above. That said, another friend and I felt a very ominous and heavy/cold presence around us, especially at around our feet, when ghost hunting at a supposedly haunted cemetery by my town. We both looked at each other and exclaimed, "Do you feel that?" We never felt anything like that before and we drove away. I was on the shitter at a friend's house and the door flung wide open with no one at the other side. What makes this questionable was that the door was quite a heavy one. Needed some pushing to get it open. That and my friend and I were the only ones at the house at the time, and it's impossible to move around the house without the floorboard squeaking even just a bit. This friend of mine was pretty heavy set at the time, no way he'd be in his room in a split second without making a noise. Living in a Vancouver Island cabin that was built in 1952. The landlady told us her husband built it for her wedding present and they lived there until 2014 when the husband had passed away and she wanted to be closer to town. So the husband was quite the jokester, and continued his shenanigans with us. The first episode was the bread. His wife told us she would always make homemade bread which he preferred. Anytime she brought store-bought, he would hide it or take his 2 hands and compress it. This wasn't as funny to me when sourdough from the Goats the Roof Market was expensive. He did not tolerate arguing or raised voices either. When my husband and I had disagreements, a loud shattering bang would happen and that shut us down every time. When we both started saying sorry to nothing, That's when we knew it's time to go. We lasted 2 months there. I suppose it qualifies. Throughout my life, I've had moments where, for whatever reason, I just knew something would happen, before it would happen, typically when it came to me winning something like a raffle or upon meeting my last couple girlfriends. I'd why, but I just know, and when the real feeling is there, and not some shadow of it that I conjure for myself, it comes true. It's not something I do. I just call it when I feel it, especially when there's no good reason to think a thing would happen, so that people won't think I'm crazy when it happens. The biggest instance of this happened back on New Year's Eve 2017. I had a foxy psychedelic experience that showed me things but, more relevantly, left me knowing, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that 2018 would be a year of major change. For me, at least one of my parents would die this year, and to not be afraid. 3 months later, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. She died the following August. While everyone held on to some hope, there was never any question for me. Meanwhile, I was quietly trying to figure out WTF was going on with me and all of this. I learned about Joseph Campbell, Kundalini, winged serpent symbolism, and other things that seemed/felt related to my experience that could help me understand it better, but there's been no definite answers. During all of this, my dad managed to finally sell his company for Mom, after 18 years. He sold his company right before she died and, right after, his brother had a series of massive strokes that killed him and, on the same day, my dad had a major heart attack and almost died himself. He had a stent placed which failed and went to surgery round 2, which he survived. All of the stress and grief, and then fear, bled into my relationship with my partner who was flying across the country on multiple occasions to help me and the family. The grief broke us that November. The woman I was certain I would marry left me and our dog. It's hard to see whether it was just a coincidental drug trip or actual divine something, but what I was told came true and I think about it literally all the time since. That New Year's Eve and the year that followed changed my life. Disturbing. Not so much scary but totally disturbing. We were camping with friends at a private campground, about 100 acres of woods surrounded by farmland. A few hours after sunset we started hearing these pitiful screams echoing through the trees. They weren't human, but that didn't make it any less disturbing as they grew more panicked, louder and more insistent as the hours went by. The caretaker drove up to the ridge to check on us. He explained one of the local farms was weaning calves, and they did this by separating the babies from the herd and penning them in the pasture farthest from their house, which was next to the camp's property line. He came offering refunds of camp fees and earplugs. About half of us took him up on the earplugs. Those who didn't sat grimly at breakfast, describing how the screams became even louder and more bone-chilling as the hours drug on. One friend said a terrified toddler is a terrified toddler, even if it's on 4 legs and hooves. Nature didn't build that sound to be ignored. I worked security at nights in an office building. Pretty easy, just had to sit on the desk and check the offices and the car park every now and again. I also had to check the storerooms in the car park because they left them unlocked if they were empty and homeless people would sneak in and camp in them. One night I was checking them. When I entered one, I took a few steps inside but missed the light switch and had to turn around to switch it on. When I did, out of the corner of my eye there was what appeared to be a pair of legs hanging down from the ceiling to the left of me. I naturally flinched away in fright, but there was nothing there when I got a better look. Maybe 5 seconds later, from behind me came a sound like someone clearing their throat and I distinctly felt something hard hit me in the middle of my back. I ran out of the storeroom in absolute terror at that, ran out into the car park all the way to the lifts and turned around to face the storeroom. Nothing, empty, just a concrete room. I knew I'd get told off if I left the door wide open with the light on, so I headed back to turn it off. I took maybe 3 steps, then through the open door I see something swing back and forth like a pendulum past the light. Nope, outta here, see you later. Asked around the other guards if any had similar experiences or knew of a death in the building, expecting a gruesome tale, but nope, nobody else ran into it or knew of any deaths. Worked there maybe 3 more years, reluctantly checking the room, from outside only, but it never happened again. Had a big purple bruise the next day between my shoulder blades, so that's how I knew I wasn't imagining it all. When I was house hunting with my ex, we inspected a house that was old but looked awesome in the listing. When I first walked in the front door, I was immediately cold from head to toe, feeling the coldness slowly move down my body. It was super weird, but I didn't think anything of it. We ended up moving into the house, and on the first day called a company that arranged for all the utilities to be connected. We'd already unpacked a lot of things and the TV was in the living room but wasn't plugged in yet. I spoke to a woman from the company and she asked for my address. When I told her, she said, "I used to live there. That house is haunted." A few seconds later the TV turned on by itself to a static noise channel. It wasn't plugged in, and we didn't have electricity connected yet. This was an old house, so there weren't any wardrobes, so all my shoes were laid out along the bedroom wall. One night I couldn't sleep and got up to get some water. When I came back to bed I noticed one of my shoes was missing. I looked around for it and finally went into one of the spare rooms, which was empty and unfurnished because the house had 4 bedrooms but we were only using 2. There in the dead center of the room, without anything around it, was my shoe. I asked my ex if he put it there and he said no, because why would he? Other times we heard tapping on windows and other random sounds that scared the shit out of us. I decided to talk to the ghost/spirit to express a peaceful coexistence with them. After that, we never heard or saw anything strange there again. I'd never believed in ghosts before that, but now I do. Back when I was a kid I went hunting with my dad. We had seen a cow, female moose, and her young following her. My dad said we don't want to duck with them. Around 10 to 15 minutes later we hear this call almost like a honk. Then we saw the female hauling us toward us. My dad was scared she was charging us, but nope, she just ran past us. Then my dad got curious and we walked back the way we came. What I had seen still makes me a little scared 20 years later. One of the calves had been ripped it too, like ripped and mauled by something. The second calf was just missing all but its leg. My dad was extremely worried because, 1. It takes a lot to scare off a mother moose, and I mean a lot. A mother moose will easily die for her young. 2. There were no tracks, nothing, all but moose tracks. We spent like 30 minutes looking for them but nothing except moose tracks. 3. Most of animals won't duck with a mother moose, especially when her young is near, much less attack the young. If they were going to attack they would go for the mother, not the young. Edit. Let me just say that this was in an area where there were not too many predators. Especially not on the size to do this. More like wolves, coyotes and maybe some honey badgers. Also, I asked my mom if my father said anything about it and she said he had never mentioned anything like it before he passed.